The first thing we need to do is create a virtual network. In order to do this, we'll go up to the search bar and type in virtual network. Then we'll go to create, and we're going to create a new resource group. I'm going to name it private link-RG for resource group. Then I'm going to name this virtual network 1 or VNet 1. Now I'm going to go create a new subnet. I'm going to title this subnet 1. I'm going to add it, click next, and then we're ready to review and create. Now we can create it. It might take a second for the deployment to go through. Now that the deployment is complete, I like to go to my resource group to make sure that everything that I just created is in there. So I looked up resource group, and I'm in my resource group, and I see that my virtual network is in there. Now we have to create a load balancer. In order to do this, we'll go back up to the search bar and type in load balancer. We'll go to the page and click create. Then we're going to use the same resource group we just created and name it load balancer. And then we're going to add a fronted IP address. I'm just going to name it fronted. And then I'm going to use the same subnet I just created. I'm going to also create a backend pool. I'm going to title this backend pool. Next, I'm going to add a load balancing rule. I'm going to name this load balancing rule. I'm keeping these names very simple and straightforward so I don't lose track of what they are. I'm going to use the fronted IP address I just created, use the backend pool I just created, and both I'm going to use this port as 80 and the backend port as 80 as well. Then I'm going to have to create a new health probe. I'm just going to title this health probe. And I'm going to change the protocol to HTTP. Save it. Save the load balancing rule. And now we are ready to review and create. Now we can create it. The deployment will take a second. Now that the deployment is done, we'll go into our resource group to make sure it's there, and it is. Next, we're going to add is a private link service. To do this, go search private link service in the search bar. Then click create. Use the same resource group everything else is in, and simply title this private link service. Then we'll click next. And we'll use everything that we have already created. The load balancer, the fronted IP address, the virtual network, and then the subnet that we created. Don't have to change anything, don't have to add any tags. We are ready to review and create. Now we're able to create it. And now we have to wait for the deployment to go through. Now that it is, we'll go into our resource group and make sure it's there, and it is. Now we're going to start to make a private endpoint. first things first, we have to add a new virtual network within our resource group. This virtual network will be for the private endpoint. So it's going to be within the same resource group, and we're going to name it VNet PE, PE for private endpoint. Click next, we're going to add a subnet. We're going to do the same thing with the subnet and name it subnet PE for private endpoint. Add it. And then we are ready to review and create. Next step in creating the private endpoint is actually creating the private endpoint. So we'll go up and search private endpoint. Click create. And we're going to use the same resource group everything's been in and name this private endpoint. Now we're going to use Microsoft.networks/private link services as our resource type, and then our resource is going to be private link service. Then we're going to use the private endpoint network that we just created and the subnet that we just created. Now we have to go in and enable the network policy for private endpoints by selecting both of those. Click save, and we are good to go to the next. We don't need to add any of that, so we're good to review and create. Once the deployment is done, our private endpoint will be created and we will be virtually done. Now that it is complete, we can go in there and make sure it is in there, and yep, right there it is. Now, last thing I'm going to show you how to do is to find the private IP address. Simply go into the private endpoint that's in the resource group, go into the network interface, and then the private IP address is right there. And that is everything I have covering private link.